Welcome back, everyone, to Todd's podcast. We have an incredible guest today. He is the state attorney for District 10, the 10th Judicial District, and that includes Polk, Highlands, and Hardee County. His name is Brian Haas, and he was elected as our state attorney for our district in 2016 and was also reelected in 2020 and 2024 just now. As a state attorney, he's responsible for all the criminal prosecutions in the 10th Judicial District. He's got 90 attorneys working for him on any given day. He started as the district or the assistant state attorney in this district. Is that where you were? Or you didn't come from somewhere else, right?
Nope, I grew up here in the 10th Circuit.
Yep, a Bartow native. Last year, you handled about 11,000 felonies. Is that what I've read? And about 20,000 misdemeanors in criminal traffic. So your office is quite busy.
Very busy.
Is that busy? Is that typical for a state attorney's office for our population base, or are we just precious and special?
No, our caseloads are pretty consistent with other similarly populated circuits.
Okay. So Brian got his undergraduate degree at Flagler College
In St. Augustine.
In St. Augustine. And in 2000, he graduated from University of Florida Law School, Levin School of Law, where my daughter graduated, my brother, and a number of other friends and fraternity brothers. So sometimes it stinks to be a Gator, but it's always good to be a Florida law grad.
That's right.
Like we just said, Brian and his wife, they live in Bartow. Winter Haven, but you're a Bartow product. And
Bartow High School.
Did you play any sports in high school?
Not really.
No? What'd you do in high school?
Tried to keep up with the work and stay out of trouble.
All right. No debate team,
No.
none of that?
No.
Any politics and
No.
student government?
I was actually on the swim team for a few years,
Okay.
so I guess that qualifies as
Sure
a sport.
it does.
I don't know if how I did it qualified as a sport, but tried to stay busy and keep out of trouble.
Well, you didn't drown.
I didn't.
One of the great guests that we had on was Rowdy Gaines, who I graduated with and was friends with him when we were kids, and world-class athlete. So I think Rowdy and his crew would argue that swimmers are incredible athletes, and I would agree with that.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about the state's attorney's office. You're the 10th Judicial District. How many districts are in Florida?
So Florida is made up of 20 circuits, and they're divided by a map that was drawn a long time ago. Try to keep the bigger circuits like Miami and Tampa. Those are also counties that are the circuit at the same time. Other circuits, for example, in the 3rd Circuit up in the northern part, there's maybe 8 counties in that circuit. So it just depends on the population. But we're a mid-sized circuit.
Okay.
We got just under 1 million people in our circuit.
So do they try and keep it population-based, or is it geography-based, so you don't have to travel too far from everywhere?
It's geography-based, and some of the circuits are really big. Up in Panhandle, and even to drive from one part of our circuit to the other, if you go from North Polk County down to South Highlands, it's quite a drive.
Pack a lunch.
Right.
What types of courts are in? So I called it district. You're calling it circuit. The proper noun or the proper word is circuit.
That's what they call them, circuits. But I mean, I understand what you mean when you say district.
Okay. So what types of courts are in our circuit? We've talked about. I mean, I've seen veterans court, teen court, traffic court. Right. There's a number of different ones. Tell us a little bit about that.
So we have our courts are set up basically with. Depending on the type of crime or the level, for a felony court, that will go to circuit court for a felony crime. Misdemeanor crimes, that's going to be handled by the county court. And there may be specialized divisions. We'll have in Polk, we'll have a division that's just for first-degree murder cases. But otherwise, for example, in Polk, we have 6 felony divisions that all they do all day, just general felony crimes. Now, the courts have created, and we've partnered with them to work on some special programs that address various parts of our community. Veterans Court's a great example of that. If you're committing a crime, you're a veteran, it's not a particularly violent crime or serious crime, but it's one where maybe there's an indication that there's some substance abuse issues, PTSD, something that's related to the service, then you would qualify to go to Veterans Court. And basically, the arrangement is this. If you agree to participate in Veterans Court and complete all the programs, then at the end, your case will be done away with. You're not going to be given that conviction in most cases. And people ask, well, what do you have to do? Well, we want, the first and foremost thing is to find the treatment for the veteran. And, some people say, well, come on back from your service and flip the switch and just become a member of society again. Well, we know better that's unreasonable to expect that. The things that our veterans and have seen and experienced, and they may not have been directly injured, but someone they knew, or just the trauma of being away from home for so long, it's impossible for most people to be able to just come back in, and they have these issues that have to be worked through. So we have someone from the VA in the courtroom trying to pair them up for services.
As their advocate.
Make sure they're getting the treatment that they need. And then we have what are called veteran mentors. These are folks that are assigned to each veteran participant, and they're that person that they can call in the middle of the night that kind of gives them some accountability. And we've had really good success. We're looking to expand the program. And I know we've had good success because some of our veteran mentors are former defendants that have really believed in the program, and now they're helping the new ones come in through. So programs like that are so important. Our behavioral health court is another area where we're trying to get treatment for folks that are experiencing major issues. They're not what you would consider a common criminal, but because of their condition, they find themselves in a mess of a situation, and the law gets involved. So what's going on with that person? How can we get them some treatment, whether it's drug treatment or mental health issue treatment? Those are great programs, and those are the kind of things that I love, because so much of what we do, unfortunately, is punishing people for bad acts and, frankly, putting them in prison if we have to. But when we can help people that really aren't bad people at all, that's the part I like.
And I've seen a couple of those. I've seen the teen court in action. I've seen the veterans court in action. I think it was Judge Williamson that was the judge that,
right.
I don't know if he's still there.
Judge Robert Williams. He's retired now.
Robert Williams.
Yeah.
And I went to court and watched them one day. My stepdaughter was a judicial assistant, I think, one day. She invited me in. And, I mean, he got down onto the ground level with them, their level, and hugged them, shook their hands, and kind of, you could tell that he really cared for them, and he was really pulling for them to succeed. And with the alternative program, do all the circuits have all of these courts that we have? Is it a statewide mandate, or do we have stuff that other circuits don't have, or do they have stuff that we don't have in our?
A lot of these courts are provided for in statute, but each circuit develops the programs that they feel are going to be most appropriate for their individual community. What you see here is going to be different from what's offered in Pinellas, and we're constantly evaluating and trying to get our numbers up and figuring out how we can reach more people. But it's not your typical what you'd expect in a courtroom, and you can't go too far with it, because there ultimately has to be accountability for the folks, and there is in the Veterans Court. It's just a different way of doing it. And with the teen court, what a great program that is.
Right.
We have a wonderful program in place that the idea is to get the attention of the kids who are committing crimes early on. But not just them, their parents. Because obviously, if you have a 12-year-old or a 13-year-old that's having interactions with law enforcement that are not positive, that's an indication that something's going on.
Right.
Wrong crowd, maybe substance abuse, no support at home. And we want to try to get the attention of the family and the kid and say, look, here's your chance to get on the right track. Because I don't like the idea of having to prosecute children for anything. But we know that ultimately my responsibility is to protect the community. So if we can get a clear message to the youth that are getting into trouble to straighten up, that's good. And a lot of them get that message.
Right.
But the problem that we see is, the criminal justice system it's reactionary. When they come to us, bad things have already happened. And we have to figure out what the best way to treat the situation is. And the most frustrating thing is when, we're in court. Let's say a 13 or 14-year-old's been taken into custody for some act that they did the night before. They're standing before the judge. They've been out of wherever it is that they live for 24 hours, and there's no parent there standing next to them at the podium. And you want to know why they're in trouble? It's because of that right there. No one has thought, gosh, I wonder where Junior is.
Right.
And so the solution, we do the best we can in the criminal justice system to put our programs in place, but it's a community problem. These kids, they want to belong to something. Like all of us, we want to belong to something, a club,
as do
or a
adults.
church.
Adults
Everybody.
do the same thing.
We all want to join something, right? We want to be part of something. And so we want the kids to be part of a after-school organization, a church group, something at school. But if they don't find those things, they'll find something to join, and that's going to be a gang.
Yeah. Well, it's too bad. I do appreciate the proactive posture that y'all are taking, and you're trying to help rather than just, penalize in every instance. And so you had mentioned that you've got about 90 attorneys. Does the number of attorneys go up and down with population, or is it, again, geography? Are there 90 attorneys in about 90? I'm sure it goes a little bit up or down. Are y'all's budgets about the same, or how do y'all operate?
Our numbers are in flux as far as our attorneys. I would prefer to have a lot more than what we do. We still have hiring challenges that have gone on since before the pandemic. And it may be getting a little bit better, but the public defender here also is experiencing some of these same issues. And I think it's a combination of a few things. One is just the private legal industry is doing pretty well, thankfully, and that's great for them. But it's very hard for government to compete. Can't compete financially, so you try to put other things forward, like being a public servant. The job of a prosecutor it's an enjoyable job, but we are continuing to have staffing challenges, as are other places around the state. But we just do the best we can with what we have, and we've got some great folks. The other thing that's been a challenge for me, and it's great for our circuit and great for our state, but since I've been state attorney, the governor has appointed some of my best prosecutors to the bench. So it's great for them, great for the circuit, but man, they're hard to replace.
How do you recruit? I mean, what I was told, my daughter's an attorney. She's not she's on the civil side. But the thing was, hey, go work for the state's attorney's office, and you'll just grind out cases, and that's where you'll get the experience of being in a courtroom, learning the rules, learning the demeanor, learning the vernacular, the vocabulary that you need to just go through, just to learn the tricks of trade of being an attorney.
I think for a young lawyer, it depends on what do you think you want out of your career as a lawyer. Some folks, they want to go work for the big firm or a private firm, and being in court and arguing and things like that, it's not that big of a deal to them. But for others, they like the idea of trials, and there's never a better place to get trial experience than a state attorney's office, because our folks are in trial all the time. And so if you wanted to turn that into a judicial career, that's a great stepping stone. If you want to turn it into a career as a defense attorney, what better way to learn how to defend a case if you've already learned how to build the case?
Correct.
So I still think it's a great place to go. The traditional ways of recruiting is to go to the law schools, but I think we're trying to find additional ways that are reaching the new lawyers coming out of law school. And what we find is, whereas a generation or two ago, people would set forth on a career and they may change jobs once or twice, and we had people that were at the office 30, 40 years, and we're just not seeing that. They're there for a year, they're there for two, whatever reason, they're moving on to other things, other areas, maybe a job that's more conducive to working from home, which we really can't do. We got to be in the courtroom. So it's a challenge. It's a worry that I have, that we need to be getting more folks in the office, but we just got to keep trying the best we can.
Well, you had mentioned if you want to come and argue cases. I knew my daughter was going to be great at that, because she argued with me for her entire life, and she's quite effective at it.
Todd's podcast is sponsored in part by SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate. Since 1996, the firm has offered unrivaled brokerage services throughout Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. With over 90 expert advisors throughout the region, our team has the knowledge and resources to help clients realize their most ambitious real estate investment goals. When you choose SVN Saunders Ralston Dancer Real Estate, you have access to a diverse suite of commercial and land services, including forestry consulting, land management, auctions, property management, commercial leasing, and negotiating conservation easements. If you're seeking to invest in land or explore commercial real estate opportunities in the Southeast, contact us today at svnsaunders.com or call 877-518-5263 to connect with an advisor today.
What about your relationship with the public defenders, the judges, the bailiffs? I mean, I know everyone has their role to play, and you kind of stay in your own lane, but you're all on the same team. You're all striving for the same goal, is to find someone guilty or innocent, depending on whether they are, and everyone has a role to play. Are you kind of the quarterback who calls it, or is the judge ultimately responsible once it gets to court, but you're kind of the guy that gets it to that point and then the judge takes over? Is that an accurate way to talk about it?
So we all have different roles to play in the criminal justice system, but I think we all are interested in a well-run, smooth, efficient operation that benefits everyone.
Right.
The public defender and I, Rick Stimmig, he's about to retire. He's a great guy. He has irritated me, and I've disagreed with him, as I have. I'm sure I've done the same for him.
But I think that's your role.
And that's the way people want it. But I respect him.
Right.
We're cordial, and if there's an issue, he's a phone call away, and we'll do the best we can. So I like him personally very much, and he's had a great career. But his office functioning well benefits not only my office functioning well, but the whole system.
Exactly.
If he's not fielding good defense attorneys, we may eventually have to retry these cases. And if he doesn't have people that can try cases, then everything stops. So we disagree, but we work together. During COVID, we all had to figure out basically how to build a court system that takes place not when you're there, which was a challenge. But the state attorney is what they call the gatekeeper to the criminal justice system. Unless I say okay to a case, it never sees the court system.
Right.
So that's an important. It's a huge responsibility that we cannot take lightly. Once it gets into the court system, then we're the ones that are moving the case forward to prosecute it. The defense, whether it's PD or private, are defending it, and then the judges are calling balls and strikes and doing their best to make sure that there's a fair process for everybody, and then ultimately at the end maybe handing down a sentence.
And is that what you would call prosecutorial discretion? That's what you have to decide whether to bring it forward or not.
Right.
How do you make those decisions to say, can I win this case, or do I believe this person is guilty? If they're guilty, maybe we could plea something out. How does the plea wrap into all of these things?
So it's a multi-step process. And the first thing that we do is analyze whether or not there's enough evidence that we can, in good faith, bring the case into the system. Okay, do we anticipate that at some future time, based on the evidence that we know, and it's got to be sworn to in felony cases, that we will be able to prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt? That's a different standard than a law enforcement officer. They just have to find what's called probable cause. So some people say, well, Brian, why do you not file all of law enforcement's cases? Well, it's easy because their standard is a lot lower than ours is, and a situation may look a certain way at 2 a.m. on the side of the road when the officer's doing the best they can based on the information they have.
Right.
We have a couple of weeks to digest everything, talk to additional witnesses, review the law. And when we do that, we may say, well, we understand why he did or she did what she did, but we're going to have to decline to prosecute the case. The cases that we decide not to prosecute are just as important as the cases that we decide to prosecute. There's got to be standards that are put in place, and law enforcement knows that. It makes them up their game, as well as when a defense attorney gets involved and they start asking the tough questions and doing the depositions and such. Law enforcement knows that. So what that does is it builds stronger cases. The stronger the case is at the beginning, the better the chance of a successful outcome is at the end. If you're putting junk into the system, you're going to get junk on the other end. So when we get this case into the let's say we decide to file it, then it's, well, what do we do with this? Okay, what's the crime? Obviously, if it's a serious first-degree or violent crime, we're going to be more aggressive, and we're going to, not be as interested in having a plea agreement. But if it's a first-time offender, or if it's something that's not very serious, we're going to look to see, is there a diversion program that we can put this person in? We've been very active in moving our diversion programs along because I have found that so many of these cases are just people making stupid mistakes, not thinking clearly. And as someone who lives here, I don't want to just fill up the prisons and jails with petty criminals. I want that person to learn their lesson and get on the right track and get out and get a job and pay taxes, right? I mean, that's kind of the way I see it. So we've really worked hard to develop our diversion programs, and they've been very successful. It helps those folks realize they got to stay out of trouble. We make them do things such as, if you don't have your GED, go get it. If you haven't worked in a while, we want to know why, and we want you to go find a job. Or go introduce yourself to the folks at Polk State and see about getting your AA. It's bettering them and getting them out of the criminal justice system. As far as overall plea agreements and other cases, we want to be consistent. We want to be fair based on what the crime is and the record of the person who's accused.
Do you take in the opinion? Do you ask the victim, what do you think? Or how much sway do they have when they say, you got to go all the way, and then you still got to say, I can't convict them, or it's not the right thing? I mean, I think their opinion should matter, but it may not be the ultimate, because you're the ultimate.
It is so important to us that we have good communication with the victim and that they understand the best they can what this process is all about. I tell my folks all the time, these victims that come into the system, first of all, they didn't choose this.
Right.
They may not have any idea or understand what it is that we're doing at the courthouse, but we have an obligation to keep them informed and be available for them to understand what's going on. And I'm interested to hear what it is that they think should happen to their case. But ultimately, it's the state of Florida whose name is on the criminal charging document, and I'm the representative of that. So we are the ones that have the final say in what happens. Now, the victim can come in and tell the judge that they're not happy,
right,
or tell us. And we don't try to get into a position where we're just disagreeing with them. But ultimately, it's my responsibility to try to do what we think is fair. And I get it. If you're a victim, or you've had a bad thing happen to your kid or your family member, the position that you want the max, I can't disagree with that.
I want revenge. I don't want justice.
But we've got a job to do, and we've also got thousands of cases. So we've got to figure out the best way to resolve a case. And the criminal sentencing guidelines are a good way to make sure that we're staying, within those parameters. And if they don't want to take the plea agreement, they don't have to take it ultimately. But thankfully, we have the ability to do that, because we would just be overrun with cases if we didn't.
So you think the guidelines are good?
Yes.
And does it kind of bring some judges from passing either too soft or too strong, say, hey, you got to kind of be in this range, and that range was set by the legislature, right, and there are conscience, I guess, on this? And
it's what the elective representatives of the people have decided should be in a particular case. And I think it's good, because when you look at a criminal sentencing score sheet, each crime, depending on the level of the crime, carries a certain number of points. The more of those crimes that you have, the more points you have. And your record also is a factor into it. So it's really, like I said, what have they done? What are we going to prove that they've done? And what have they done in the past? And then it puts what's called a lowest permissible prison sentence. Now, most cases are not prison eligible, just because it's a lower level. But for the ones that they've done something bad enough, or their record is bad enough, then we would be seeking prison. And the other part that I get questioned about is the mandatory minimums and things like that. And we've got some great judges here. I think our judges are the best in the whole state, in the 10th Circuit. But I'd hate to have a person just get a ridiculously low sentence just because on the whim of a judge.
Right.
So I believe that there should be guardrails
Or
in place.
ridiculously high sentence.
Or ridiculously
right.
high sentence.
Right, I get it.
But I think that they're important because I've heard some bad stories from other places in the state where they're letting them off too easy.
Well, you see those in the press, and it seems like when these things happen, they do get the press, and then sometimes the pendulum in Tallahassee will swing the other way, and then I guess over time they all kind of balance themselves out.
Right.
You had mentioned your relationship with law enforcement. We'd had a couple of, I don't know if they were detectives at local PDs that kind of they had lost the faith of the prosecutor's office a few years ago. And I mean, that's almost, if you can't trust this officer to come in and tell the truth, I would assume that that's kind of, you need to be thinking of another line of work.
Right. All you have is your word.
Right.
And if you cannot trust the word of a law enforcement officer, then really the whole system starts to break down. So we hold hold law enforcement officers to a very high standard, and I make no apologies for that. And I have the support of our sheriffs in the 3 counties and our local chiefs because they want the same thing. But it's uncomfortable sometimes when you
Right.
really have to put it to them, or when you have an entire department that you have concerns about. It's uncomfortable. It's not pleasant, but my job is to do what I think is right. And so for one particular department right now in our county, I don't accept homicide investigations from that department or serious motor vehicle accidents because I've seen where cases have been seriously harmed by insufficient investigation. And so it's not my job to be their friend, although I respect them all very much. I've got a job to do, and that's to put the best case forward to represent the state.
And I think for the most part, the ones that don't live up to that standard are the exception and not the rule. Thank
By and
goodness.
far.
I think you see a cop, you think that's a pretty darn good guy or gal right there. They're busting their hump for us or keeping us safe. They sworn to protect us, and they're going to do whatever they can in their power to do that.
We got awesome law enforcement in this circuit,
Yeah.
and I don't expect perfection, but when you start messing with the truth, that's where there's no
Right.
compromise there. Mistakes are going to be had. We make mistakes at our office, but when it comes down to the truth, no.
Do you ever feel empathy for the people that you have to convict, or that you do convict? I shouldn't say have to, but that you do convict.
Yeah, there's a few that come along that just from the first go, they're just evil, and we need to do. And I don't feel sorry for them, and we need to do everything we can to put them in prison. But so many times when we're prosecuting folks, we know we have a job to do, but you just can't help but wonder, how did they end up in the situation that they're in? And that kind of go back to what we were talking about before with the family situations
started
and
early.
the upbringing and all that. So, which is why I think it's so important that our community does everything it can to, be all in on early education and, supporting families, supporting single parents, because a lot of times these people are just found in very bad situations that they didn't intend for.
What are some of the more challenging cases that you've had, and the emotional cases? I mean, I know some of them you have to take home with you at night, and your attorneys and your staff do. I know that's probably hard to turn it off and on at 5 o'clock. But I would assume some just really are difficult.
So before I was serving as a state attorney, elected as a state attorney, I was in a division, the SVU division,
Right.
and actively prosecuting cases, doing jury trials, meeting with victims, officers, things like that. And so those cases where I saw the kids as victims were some of the most difficult things that I've ever seen in my life. Just forget about just the work. And just watching how maybe the person that should have been there to protect them is the monster that committed the crime against them. And you can't leave that at the door when you walk out at the end of the day. So those are tough. And I often wonder, where are those kids today? Their lives were shattered, and I know what happened to the defendants, but the victims, their lives go on. We move on, and they're kind of stuck in this mess. And now as state attorney, it's meeting with the families of the victims where maybe a family member has been killed or seriously hurt, and I just see folks that are just broken, and you know, we can never help them go back to where they were, put their lives all back together. But my goal is to, one, give them the respect that they deserve, but also do the best we can to get them the justice that they deserve. And maybe that's just some small piece of them putting their life back together.
So your team that has to deal with this, and to a degree Rex's team as well, how do y'all deal with the stress and the tension? Are there formal programs where you make your attorneys go through and say, you've had a tough time, you've had a tough case, very emotional, you got to take 3 days off, or you need to go see this person, or we've got this program? How do you guys deal with some of these emotional things that just rip you apart?
The stress of the job is real, and for somebody to say, oh, that's just make believe, or you're just weak, or whatever, that's nonsense. You see it in law enforcement that have to repeatedly work long hours and go out to the scenes, but you see it with prosecutors and public defenders. And so we try to provide as many resources as we can to our folks. But, you know, over the years, we've had folks that have had bouts with alcoholism and, you know, drug abuse. And those are things that are very, very hard to deal with. And we try to be supportive of our employees, but it's a very tough job.
Are there people within your department that are there to really kind of look at the challenges that your folks go through and say, hey, we might need to spend a little time with Mary or John,
Yep.
or they need some time off because they're burning themselves out
Right.
and they're not good for their family or for us or whatever?
We try the best that we can to keep track of that. And the other thing is that you can't leave a person in a division for an extended period of time if it's a caseload that's so challenging. We have to move them around and get them a break, basically.
If a citizen, and I want to preface something, my perception of trial in court is from that stupid TV show Law and Order, and I apologize for that, but it's on TV all the time, and you watch it, and my daughter always says, Dad, it's not like that.
Right.
And it's like,
It's entertaining.
Well, yeah. Well, how do they have a 6-week trial or whatever, and everyone's in the same clothes, or
Right.
they can bring it in 23 minutes? So
Incredible.
she said, it's not like that. But, you know, if a citizen wants to bring a case forward or press charges against an individual, how do they do that? Do they have to call the sheriff's office to get them to open it? I mean, you guys don't open the case, correct, if it's a criminal thing?
By and large, our cases come to us through criminal referrals from law enforcement. And in Polk County, it's going to be from the sheriff's office or our different municipalities, or an agency like, let's say, the FHP, the Florida Highway Patrol. They send us plenty of cases. So that's a huge majority of how we get our cases. We do have our own investigators, and over the years, for various reasons, we've had to do our own investigations, and we can bring charges ourselves, and we do, but it's very rare.
So that's kind of left up to the law enforcement guys and gals to, hey, here's something you guys need to look at, and that's the probable cause
Right.
versus the
Right.
reasonable doubt.
So they need to contact their local law enforcement agency, and that's the best, most efficient way to get it done.
Change of venue. You see that. Again, sorry, TV reference. How hard is it to change a venue?
Well, it's only, I guess the best way to answer that is it should only be done when it's absolutely necessary.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example. We had a case in Sebring from 2019 where a man went into the SunTrust Bank and murdered 5 ladies.
I remember that.
And the cases were done with the jury part of it. They did recommend the death penalty, but it's still set for sentencing coming up by the judge. That's part of the process. But it was important to the folks in Highlands County that they handled that case. It devastated that community, but to have it shipped away, to have other people consider, I think would have been very hard for them, because they wanted to take care of it. But it is so important that that defendant, as despicable as his actions were, has an absolute fair trial, and that people didn't come in with preconceived ideas or biases against him.
Right.
So we did our best, and we were successful in getting a jury that was able to do that. But a change of venue, I think, should be done only as a last resort.
Hey, listeners.
Hey, everyone.
Hola.
Hi, all.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
This is Rob Palumbo.
This is Fred Hyde.
This is Juliet Ashley Vide.
Dr. Angela Garcia Falconetti.
This is Congressman Scott Franklin.
This is Margie Grant.
This is Jake Palumbo.
And I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Thank you for listening to Todd's podcast.
Please make sure that you like and or subscribe.
Don't forget.
Don't forget
to subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. Tune in and listen.
Join in and listen to us.
Thanks.
Thank you.
A little bit on the political side. You're elected.
Right.
Do you think that's the right way for you to have this position? Your predecessor was there 30 some odd years, I think. Do you think it should be an elected office of the people or the governor?
I think it should be elected. I think it's absolutely correct the way that it is. I'm responsible to the people that I represent right here in the 10th Circuit, and I'm okay with that. And if my way of handling cases, going about my business and prosecuting cases doesn't align with what the folks living here aren't okay with,
I agree with that.
then they're going to find somebody else to be the state attorney, and that's okay if that's the way that it goes. Now, on the flip side, I think it's my responsibility to listen to the people who elect me and be responsive to the views of the community, and because what works here is not maybe what the people in Fort Lauderdale want, right, or Jacksonville. So I want to be a state attorney for the people of Polk, Highlands, and Hardy County, and I think I have a pretty good idea about what that is. And I think that's the way it should be.
I agree. If not, you would just be working for the governor or whoever appoints you.
Exactly.
Now you're working for the people who elect you. And,
right,
sometimes it's like, well, why am I electing a judge? Why am I electing a state's attorney? Why am I doing some of these things? But I think you just said it very eloquently, is it so that you're there representing the people and the mores of the community and what's important to them, rather than in Tallahassee or wherever the state capital is for whatever state they may be in.
Well, and I think that that the politics of it is actually really important. Instead of having to check in with a person who appoints you in a faraway city, I feel the responsibility and the obligation to get out there in the community.
Right.
And
you do.
I
mean,
try.
I mean that is a compliment.
Thank you.
Do.
I never saw myself as a politician. I was a prosecutor, thought maybe one day be a judge. This opportunity presented itself, and I decided, with the okay from my wife and family to do this. But it got me out of my comfort zone, and I get to places that I wouldn't in my normal daily life get to, and I'm good with that. Right. People need to know who their state attorney is, and when I'm out there, it's not all, I get a lot of compliments, but I also get a lot of, why'd you do this, or what are you going to do about that? And that's the part I love. Don't tell me I'm doing great. I want to hear from the people that say, he's not, this is not a good way to handle this or that, and I listen to all of that.
But when they say that, it's the perfect opportunity for you to explain why, and when you give them context to their opinion and to why you've done what you've done, a light turns on usually. It's like, oh, I thought it was this. It's really that. Here's more information, and this makes perfect sense why Brian's office did it the way Brian's office did it, rather than me thinking he should have just, checked a box or signed an X or whatever.
I love those conversations because at the end, I really believe that they're going to think, well, I may not agree with him, but I don't question his motives. And I think he's trying to do the best that he thinks he should be doing. Right. And that's what I always aim for. And that's part of the challenge of the job, is that we're doing this job in a different era. The idea of a newspaper reporter who had journalistic standards, who also I may have disagreed with, but at least they did what they could to get this side, get that side printed out. That's gone for the most part. And so now we have anybody with a keyboard and a computer or even a phone.
A point of view.
They're a journalist now.
Yes, they all have a point of view.
With no standards.
And they want everyone to know what their point of view is, not necessarily the other side or the truth or whatever.
Exactly.
So you're elected by the people, but it seems like the governor has been having some input on some other state attorneys that he has suspended. I don't know, is that commonplace, or is that like, that's a one-off? Is it something that's happened over the years? If they're elected, why does the governor have that pull?
It's very rare, and
which is good.
Yes, but any elected official, I would say most elected officials, in Florida, there's a mechanism for them to be removed, whether you're a city commissioner or someone else,
County
suppose a
commissioner.
sheriff, a county
Yeah.
commissioner, right? If what you're doing,
Podcast producer with Eli
right.
over there.
what you're doing is so egregious that it warrants a removal.
Right.
And I think the courts are going to have to sort out, what has happened in these two state attorney situations. But I can tell you that as the state attorney between the two that were removed, I saw absolute, no question, the impact of not enforcing the law
Right.
like you should. And it was starting to have a spillover effect in our circuit. We would catch some kids at the county line over towards Orlando, and they didn't necessarily know where they were. They would be laughing at the deputies because they know it's catch and release. But then when they figure out that they were going to Bartow instead of Kissimmee, the look of horror on their face.
Right.
Now, criminals understand the way things work. And when you go about just not enforcing the law and letting the criminals run the place, you're going to have problems. So we give people a lot of chances. We work with a lot of folks, but ultimately people need to know that in this circuit, they're going to be held accountable.
It seems like a person in your position as state attorney, if you're not committed to upholding every law that's out there, yes, you do have some discretion, that you really shouldn't be in that job. As maybe you should be on the defense side or another line of work. And if you don't agree with a law, either try and change it in Tallahassee or submit your resignation. And it should not be, turning a blind eye, even if you don't agree with it.
Well, making bold statements about not prosecuting certain things or declaring that you're not going to seek the death penalty, that is not my job as the state attorney.
Right.
If I wanted to change the law, I'd go run for the state house or the Senate, which I have no interest in doing. That those folks do a great job, but it's not for me.
Yeah.
We advocate when the sessions when they're in session about certain things, but it's the legislature's responsibility to make the law, the governor to sign the laws, and I'm fine. I have enough to do
Right.
with the cases that we're prosecuting. I don't need to get into telling everybody what the law should be.
You had mentioned earlier that occasionally I'm not sure how often it is, maybe occasionally is the wrong word, that some of your attorneys will go over to the public defender side. Mm-hmm. Why would they do that? Is it to round out, not necessarily maybe their resume, maybe that's what they want, round out their legal background, their legal experience, or do they say, I just really feel like the defense needs a little more strength? What are the reasons they give you?
I think there's some people that just decide my calling is to stand next to the accused and protect their right to
Perfectly legitimate.
counsel, and thank God for those people.
Yep.
We need them. I think other people embrace the idea of having their own law firm and setting their own schedule and kind of building their own little business, so if
Right.
you will. And you can't do that as a prosecutor. You're a government employee, and some people just don't like that. Our hours are set. You have there's not a lot of flexibility as far as what you have to be there. And other people want to build their own firm, and we've got some local defense attorneys that are incredibly successful, and they're a big part of our community, and they do valuable work, making sure that everyone's held accountable.
Some other challenges that I've noticed is our legal system really seems to be like it's under an unprecedented verbal assault from both sides. You've got a former president who claims bias by prosecutors, from judges and juries, and then the left is verbally assaulting the Supreme Court. That's got to have trickled down to y'all's level. What does it do to the judicial system on the local level? And how do you handle that with the morale of your team who's going, my God, these people are just saying what we do doesn't matter, or it's not legitimate? I would think that's got to be very demoralizing from time.
It's a huge challenge. If you think about it, I've put my life's work into this criminal justice system. When I came out of law school, there were a lot of different directions I could have gone, and I have chosen to work in this system, and I love it. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But I'm proud of the work that we do. I'm proud of the people who are in the system. But when I see some of the things going around the country and they're said, it's hard to take. But I can't get consumed with it. All I tell our folks is, look, we can control what we can control right here. And at the local level, where we are the closest to the people, right here, if the people have confidence in our system and they see what we're doing and they experience it firsthand, that's the best we can do to build confidence in what we're doing. But it hurts. When you've got a jury, what are they thinking?
Right.
What have they heard? What perspective are they coming from? So all we can do is do the best we can here and hope that it spreads in a good way.
I don't think you can just blow it off, but I think you're dealing with it. You're taking it head on and say, hey, what we can control is right here in front of us. I think that's a great approach to it. But again, it's got to be tough. And y'all are citizens. You pay taxes. You've got to see decisions and say, like, how in the world did they decide that? And it may be, I don't have all the facts. I got to have faith in the system that the judge, the juries, both sides of the aisle have more facts than I do. I always said that when I was a county commissioner. People said, why would you do such a stupid thing? Let me give you some context. Let me tell you about the professional testimony that I've had from experts and everybody. And it's like, oh, that makes sense. Kind of like you talking to the victims who want that.
Yeah, I think you have to be very careful that the job, the position opens itself up to people thinking that they can use it or use you for their own political gains or their own, paybacks. And once you start letting that happen, then you're just part of the problem.
Is the way that we appoint and select judges higher up, do you think that's appropriate? Do you think it's, for the most part, it works? You see, and I will tell you, I think journalism is basically dead. And I think they will slant things for a point of view as opposed to just telling you the facts and letting you decide it. So
yeah, the good thing about the judges that I deal with here on the local level,
right,
most of them are initially appointed, but they all have to stand for election.
Correct.
So there's that accountability that I think always stays with them, and I think that's very positive. As far as the appellate court judges and that, I don't know much about how they go about their job, but my overall sense is that they do a pretty decent job, and not because I agree with them or disagree with them. I want them to fairly consider the facts of the case, and if they do their job, then that should be what it is. And to demean someone because you don't agree with their, the way they see it as a judge, well, that's not the way to go about it.
Yeah. So Amendment 3 is on the ballot, and it is legalizing recreational use of marijuana. For those that don't know, how will it affect how you administer your office if it passes? Is there going to be a massive release of? I've had conversations with our sheriff, none of the other sheriffs in your district. They certainly have their opinion, but on the prosecution side, is it all of a sudden people that are in jail, do they get their cases re-looked at, or it's either going to dump a lot of people back out or say, hey, this is really not as big of a deal as we thought it was?
If the voters decide to approve this amendment, then we'll obviously follow the law and govern ourselves appropriately. But there's been a lot of misinformation. Our jails are not filled with people sitting there for possessing misdemeanor marijuana amounts. It's just not true. Right. If you looked at the jail rolls and you saw people in there on a possession charge, I can promise you they're there because they also have possession of methamphetamine. Maybe they've been accused of burglary. Else. It's just that's what they added on, when they're doing their thing. So I don't think it would have any effect as far as clearing out the jails. Those are all misdemeanors anyway. And for the longest time, the standard operating procedure for marijuana cases has been to run them through our diversion program. And we're not labeling them as drug offenders. We're not taking their driver's license away. We're not putting them in jail for the most part if it's just that standalone charge. I want those folks to comply with the law as it is today and, go get a job, not sit in jail.
So the diversion programs that you mentioned here, the teen court, the drug court, the veterans court, do you monitor the recidivism rate? Is there a rate, hey, if we can get 90%, we're happy. If we get 50%, we're happy. Is it kind of a art instead of a science when you figure out those whether it's working or not?
Right. You want to know that what you're doing is successful, because if it's not, then you need to figure out how you can change it to make it successful. Our teen court program is very successful, and you're not going to get 100% or even 90% success on the first time. We don't advertise it, but sometimes it takes more than once or twice for a kid to get the message. So we're going to let them, as long as they're not committing terrible crimes, they're probably going to come through teen court again. Now, maybe this time we'll up the sanctions a little bit, but the goal is to get that message across and rehabilitate. The goal of the adult criminal justice system is punishment, but for the juveniles, it's rehabilitation and get them on the right track. And the same thing for our diversion program. We want to make it such that they don't ever want to come back through our diversion program again. And so they've got to do the drug screens. They've got to show us that they're working, they're trying to get a job, and make it unpleasant enough so that they don't want to do it again.
Can you rehabilitate criminals that go to prison? I'm assuming there are some.
Well, yes. Again, the first purpose, and it's in the law, I didn't make it up, it just says that the primary purpose is punishment. But we know, unless you're putting that person away for life or they're on death row, they're at some point going to get out. Most, by far, are going to get out. So I think the responsible thing to do is, while they're in prison, hopefully get them set up with situations where they can get a trade, be able to support themselves when they get out. Because the reality is they're getting out.
Right. And they've got to figure out how to function in society.
And we don't want to have to put them back in prison again. We want them to go do something productive.
Do we have a big fentanyl crisis in our country, in our district, in our state?
We have it in the country. We have it here. I can't imagine a better law enforcement community taking it head on than we are right here in our circuit. And that's the only way you can approach it is just constantly try to stay ahead of it. But it's very frustrating when you see the huge amounts moving in.
Are the punishments that the state has set for you guys to seek, are they sufficient? Are we lagging behind? Do we need to ratchet up the intensity of the punishment?
I think our laws are they're good. They're strong. We can even charge a drug dealer with first-degree murder now if we can link them to supplying someone who dies from an overdose. So our legislature, our governor's been great in giving us good laws.
What's the biggest misconception there is about the state's attorney's office? Or are there any?
Well, I think, you hear the term prosecutor or and sometimes what will come to mind is just put as many people in prison as you can, go to the max. And look, we have to do that from time to time. But a vast majority of our cases are seeing if we can work things out to a fair resolution. And if there's an ability to help the person, let's do it. We're humans like everybody else, and the cases that we decide we shouldn't prove, I said this earlier, or shouldn't go forward with, that's just as important as the ones we file on.
It seems to me, as I've gotten older, that I look at things a little different, as we all do, and I look back and I just say, what a great system of governance that we have here. We govern ourselves. We don't have a king or a queen telling us. As the community mores and society norms kind of come into play over time, there may be something that is an outlier here or there. But at some point, you're still a human. You live in our community. You've got family that participates in the community. I do. And it's time for everybody to step up. I'm not a lawyer. I could never do what you do. You may never wanted to have done what I did on policy side, which is fine, but we all have a role. I just think that the fact that we govern ourselves is such a wonderful thing, and a lot of checks and balances are put in to keep you guys within the lanes that you've been given, to keep the defense in the lanes. Me is what I had. So I think the country is just so phenomenal. It just bothersome when people attack it, because I don't think they've looked at the big picture of what we have here.
We've got something very special here, and I also think we have an obligation to try to share that with the generations to come.
Hey everybody, this is your host Todd Dantzler, and I hope you're enjoying this episode. I would like to take a moment to do a shameless plug for my real estate business. As most of you know, I'm a partner with SVN Saunders Ralston Dantzler Real Estate, but I am also a working broker who is very active in listing and selling real estate. I've been in this business for over 41 years. I know, you're thinking he can't be. He's so young looking. But no, it's true. I've been actively listing and selling commercial real estate my entire working career on properties ranging from ag land to multifamily projects to office and commercial and industrial properties. I have held the distinguished CCIM designation since 1991. This is the highest designation you can achieve in the commercial real estate field. I believe that a big part of my success in the real estate business is because of the relationships that I have fostered throughout the state of Florida and also right here in Polk County. So if you have any real estate needs in buying or selling, please give me a call to see if I can help out. My direct line to my desk is 863-877-2846. Again, that's 863-877-2846. Do you watch TV crime dramas? Do you do any of that? Do you just sit in there and laugh at them when y'all have your Monday morning meeting? Say, do you see what this idiot did? How do they try that?
Yeah, it is purely for entertainment purposes, and sometimes it's fun to watch because you see how detached from reality it really is.
I would think the cop shows are a lot like that for
right.
our law enforcement folks as well.
Exactly.
I guess they've got to bring enough entertainment in to keep your eyeballs.
But the people like to watch it.
Yeah.
And you get it all resolved in under an hour.
Yeah. So talking about that a little bit, podcasts are going on out there, wrongful convictions. You start seeing all these or hearing all these things, and you know as well as I do that anyone can slant a story the way they want an outcome.
Right.
It happened to me. I know it's happened to you. Yep. It's happened to cases you've worked on. If you've been doing anything in the public, you know how the press can work. How do you guys combat that and say, holy cow, that's not what happened, or that's not right at all? What do you do about that?
Well, the problem is that, like we talked about before, the idea of a, local newspaper with, 50 reporters that have standards and have editors and did you check this and that? I mean, that for the most part is gone. So anybody with a recording device and an agenda or an interest in doing it can do that. And that, you know what? It's the ultimate freedom of speech. And, you put the content out that you want, but when they start misrepresenting things or leaving key things out, then I think it's a disservice to the public.
Right.
And that's a real concern that I don't know what the answer is for because the megaphone's pretty big.
Yeah. I asked you if we could talk about Bone Valley, and you said we could. And when I thought about, hey, I'd like to do a podcast, I'd never even listened to one before. And Jennifer and Eli and a couple others said, well, maybe you should listen to some before you think you can do it.
Yeah.
And one that was recommended was Bone Valley. So I listened to it, and it's like, wait, I couldn't turn it off. It was such compelling.
Right.
I listened to it in my car. It was like car radio to me. And the guy's voice and the lady's voice and the story, how they laid it out. And it's like, wait, they're quoting Brian Haas. They're quoting Grady Judd. They're quoting Jerry Hill. I know these guys personally, and they're making them sound like they're not telling the truth. And I'm going, I know these guys. That can't be the truth. And I'm fortunate in that I know y'all, and I know that that wasn't it. And so I followed it just because it was interesting radio, but I knew there were adults on the other side is the wrong way to say it, but there was another side of the story that wasn't being told. And, I just frustrated.
Well, I think that there's probably not a big demand for listening to a podcast about how they got it all right.
Correct.
And so, that particular case that was subject to that podcast, I had never really heard of it until, earlier on in my term. And I started, well, what is this case? And so I had the people that I trust the most, none of whom were maybe even alive at the time that the case was sent, is look at this case.
Right.
And my goodness, if there's something that we need to do, we'll do it. The last thing I want to do is have any part in someone who we question or wonder if they're really guilty being in prison for an extra second. And I wouldn't hesitate for a minute to take action if I felt that I needed to. But, the more and more folks that I trust that actually looked at the evidence and the transcript and the things that are required to be considered by courts, they repeatedly came back and said the conviction is solid, and it's got some incredible facts to it. With the later discovery of of whose fingerprint was in there and all that. I mean, it's fascinating. But clearly, the easiest thing for me to do would have been let's figure out a way to get out of this case.
Right.
But that's not how you do this job. Is finding the easy ways. I say that you could go down to the courthouse today and walk into a courtroom and maybe just happen to catch the defense attorney's closing arguments, and that's all you do. And then when he or she's done, you walk out. You're going to get in that elevator and think, my goodness, that guy's not guilty.
Right.
That's because he's an advocate and he is highlighting what he thinks is important.
Right.
But the job of a prosecutor or of a judge or an appellate court, all of whom have looked at that particular case multiple times, is to consider all of the evidence. And when you leave out critical facts or you overlook or say, well, that's not as important, particular things, then you're really misleading your listener. If you have a recipe to bake a cake, let's say, and you have all these things that have to go in it, you got to have everything builds on another. Each ingredient has a certain purpose for the final product. But if you just take the recipe and you just put 6 or 7 of the things in there, and maybe you really go heavy on the flour because that's what you're interested in, but you leave out the sugar or whatever else goes into a cake, I'm not much of a baker.
Right.
The end product is going to be, my goodness, this thing stinks. So it is what it is, and the folks have a right to put that product out there, but they should put a disclaimer on that thing, and they should say that it's an interpretation, or I think as the fellow who put it out, he called it a narrative,
Right.
a narrative story of some sort, based on investigation. And that's just the way that it's going to be. But I believe that the conviction has been reviewed so many times by judges that have no connection to anybody.
What I can't understand, and not just here, but on any of them, when they say, hey, this prosecutor did this or that, why would you not want to convict the right person? I mean, the fact that you would convict the wrong person, knowingly so, that means the bad guy is still out in the community where you live, where
Right.
your family lives, where your team lives. I just can't imagine going through life thinking that. It'd be tough to get out of bed on Monday morning. I think you have to have faith in our institutions, although they are under assault from time to time. But I think you just have to have faith that good people are doing good work and they're representing us because they want to protect their families as well as they want to protect the rest of us.
And the idea that you would rack up convictions just for the sake of racking up convictions
Right.
it shows you don't understand the system.
Correct.
These folks are going to have jobs, as long as they're doing the right thing. And I don't really know that prosecutor who handled the case very well. I mean, we were in the office for a while
it's
at
just
the
one
same
case.
time.
Just one
Right.
that I'd listened to.
But what I do know is that particular individual, before he died, actually went up to Tallahassee to a parole hearing for a person he convicted and put in prison for the rest of his life, and advocated for him to get out. Not because he didn't think he was innocent or he's guilty, but because he was young when he did it, and that he thought that he had rehabilitated himself, and that he spoke on behalf of that guy getting out. People don't know that.
Yeah. This has been a pretty heavy podcast, and I appreciate it. I appreciate your openness and your honesty with everything. You've answered everything that we've asked. You've never said, hey, Todd, let's not talk about that, and I appreciate that. I want to talk a little bit about you. We kind of call it a lightning round from time to time. What kind of food do you like? What's your favorite food?
I love pizza.
Okay.
Yep.
From?
Anywhere. Sometimes the Jay Burns pizzas where I like the thin crust.
Yeah.
But sometimes the if you're traveling, like the Detroit style pizza is really good. So I know none of it's good for you, but sometimes you got to eat it.
It's a good treat.
Yep.
What kind of hobbies do you have, or do you have any?
Well,
Have you grown since high school, or you didn't
no.
have any?
I'll tell you, it's my wife is a elementary school principal, so she's incredibly busy. I'm busy with my work, but so the downtime is just being at home,
Right.
watching sports. I love football. No, depending on the type of year, but this is my favorite time of year, watching football. But I'll watch baseball, hockey, pretty much anything like that. That's how I relax.
How frustrated are you as a Gator fan?
Yeah, it's pretty
Or do
frustrating.
you have another college? That
No, that's the one I follow. It's frustrating to see, and I don't know where it all goes from here.
Yeah, I learned from my dad early on in life when I was a kid, if you live and die with the Gators, you'll die many more deaths than you will alive. So how about movies? Do you and your wife like to go to movies? No?
Not really. I can't remember the last movie I went and saw, seriously.
I'm kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
What sport is your favorite? Is it football?
Football, yeah.
What about your pro team?
Bucks.
Yep. Music? Do you like music?
I just listen to whatever's on. My kids over the years were interested in country music, so they'll play that. But growing up, I loved listening to Dave Matthews Band. As a young kid, Billy Joel. But pretty much anything is good. Yeah.
I seem to kind of gravitate back more towards the classic rock.
Mm-hmm.
I liked a lot of the electric guitars, and I was born almost in the 60s, and so I was a product of the 60s and 70s and 80s, and
right.
I don't really know what's going on with the music today that Eli listens to. Anything else you'd like to talk about? Any challenges you have? Is there anything that the public can help you with? Do y'all have any needs that the public can do anything for you?
No, I think this is a great community to do the job that I do in. And from the perspective of law enforcement, this is a community that supports its law enforcement,
right.
And that's not to say they always agree with everything that's done, but we're in a good place here. We really are. I know there's frustrations with this or that, but our community is a great place, and I'm thankful to be able to be the state attorney in the 10th Circuit.
Well, I think we're very fortunate to have you. I think we were fortunate to have Jerry's leadership for decades before you. We've had great state attorneys. But you're right. We're very fortunate. This podcast goes out to more than just
Right.
Polk County folks,
Right.
but, it is a great place to live. And, my biggest hope is that people will listen to both sides. They will give our institutions the benefit of the doubt and say, maybe I should look a little deeper and explore a few more facts rather than just that one story I read on the internet. And we've all been a victim of that guy or gal coming up to us in Publix and saying, why did you do that? And I said, well, look, if you got a few minutes, I'll tell you the rest of the story and why I did it. And they typically go, yeah, that makes a lot more sense. So I appreciate all you and your team do, Rex and his team, trying to get Rex on the podcast before he retires. And we've had communications. We're just trying to get it scheduled and everything. So thank you for being our state attorney for our circuit. And thank you for your team and what all they do to keep us safe and keep the bad guys in jails and get the good ones shorter terms.
You bet.
So
thank you.
Appreciate it. And with that, Eli, I think we're done for this one. And I appreciate all your help. Everybody have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you. Hey, everybody, I want to thank you for listening to Todd's podcast. This has been your host, Todd Dantzler. As always, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and subscribe to Todd's podcast on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions for me or any suggestions for future guests, please call or text our number at 863-288-0944 or visit todddantzler.com. Again, that's 863-288-0944 or visit my website, todddantzler.com. I look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and please take care.